is Liz Cheney, who is in town too. I love this. You have your pre-announcement announcement that you're going to be announcing like all candidates do today.
Well, not exactly, but it's great to be with you, Glenn, and great to be back in Gillette. And
Right.
we're launching the campaign today and launching here in Campbell County.
Okay, why Campbell County is a place to launch?
I think it's absolutely clear that no state in the union has been more hurt by 8 years of Barack Obama's policies. And Campbell County is certainly one of, maybe the hardest hit county. I think that the extent to which this president has launched a war on coal, he is determined, it seems, to end the coal industry in the United States. And it very much is part of what has motivated me to run, the need to have somebody in Washington who will stand up and fight and who will be able to begin the process of reversing the damaging policies he's put in place, whether it's the Clean Power Plan, Obamacare, Waters of the United States, and then the fundamental threat to our constitutional rights, the First Amendment rights, our Second Amendment rights. Across the board, we have a president whose policies are going to require a lot of work to undo, and we're going to need the very strongest voice possible in Washington to do that.
Okay, so there are a lot of policies in place and a lot of agencies in place, like the EPA, the BLM. How do you fight all of them?
Well, what you've got to do, first of all, is be willing to stand up and roll these things back. Sometimes it means you're going to cut off funding for implementation of these programs. Sometimes it means that you're going to be able to build a national coalition. When it comes to what the EPA is doing in terms of the war on coal, in order to end that, in order to get the government back to where it needs to be and out of the business of trying to ensure that, the coal industry dies, we've got to be able to bring other people to our side. It's not enough for us to just fight as Wyoming. We've got to be able to make the case to people that if you like electricity,
right,
when the president wages war on coal, you're going to feel it too. And that's the way we can begin the process of reversing course on these policies and rolling things back.
So you're talking about getting with other states then in order to bring that. And how do you bring those other states in the coalition? Is this like a Western coalition? You bring in Kentucky too?
Sure, absolutely. And I think some of it is happening now. You've seen lawsuits that are being brought by, 27 states against some of these rules. But it's also a process of being able to explain to people, being willing to stand up, have the courage of your convictions, make clear that we're not, as Republicans, going to just capitulate because President Obama, seems to think he's a king and has much of the media behind him, but that we're going to effectively fight back. We're going to explain to people why we believe in limited government and low taxes and a strong national defense. We're going to be able to bring to bear a national spotlight on these issues, but also not just sort of be one of 435 members in Washington. We've got to have the strongest voice possible to fight these fights.
Okay. So does that include cutting off the funding to some of these agencies?
Absolutely.
Well, that's what I'm a big advocate of myself.
Absolutely. We now have a federal government that has ballooned beyond anything our founders could even have imagined. And the Constitution is a pretty good guide on this. There are enumerated powers the federal government ought to be doing, and otherwise authority is with the states and with the people in the states. And what's happening today, especially under this president, is a belief fundamentally that the federal government should be involved in every aspect of people's lives. And so he's got the federal government involved in things it should not be involved in, but he's completely ignoring areas that are crucially important that only the federal government can do, like securing our borders, like defending the nation. So, we really need to get back to a place where we are much more true to what was laid out in the Constitution in terms of where power should reside.
Okay, so let's get to some of those personal issues at home. Obamacare, repeal, replace?
Absolutely.
With what?
I think there are a number of things we ought to be looking at, like I don't know why we don't let folks buy insurance across state lines. You can shop around for your car insurance. We need to introduce some competition into the insurance market. And you've got to have a system where people can pick and choose, and that forces the insurance companies to provide better services, better deals, better prices, if in fact they want your business. So that's one thing. And certainly I think we've got to be in a situation where people aren't forced into having to either forego care or pay higher premiums or be in a position where they can't choose their own doctors, which is everything that we're seeing with Obamacare. Everything the critics said would happen has happened, and much worse. And finally, you have to have a system in place where your healthcare system isn't imposing on people a requirement that means they can't hire if they're small business owners. They're going to go out of business if they're small business owners. And one of the most important rules with respect to Obamacare and every other piece of legislation that Congress passes is Congress has to live under whatever rules it passes. And too often, especially with Obamacare, we've seen efforts in Washington by, members of Congress to say, well, for some reason, I don't have to be on the exchange or it doesn't apply to me. So, we've all out here had these laws imposed on us, but the people in Washington who failed to stop it or who participated in passing it are now sort of saying, yeah, but it doesn't really apply, to us. We're special. And that should never be the case.
Okay. I feel like I'm on a lightning round with you, but let's just keep going. So Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security all falls under that, especially because Medicare in this country and Medicaid have been used as basically socialist medicine now. So we're replacing Obamacare. Now, all of a sudden, we have a problem with failing systems that people can't turn to that need help. How do we save those systems?
Well, we have to start today, and we've got to be in a place where we are able to tell our senior citizens that the systems are going to be there for them. We have too many people who have worked too many years under the real commitment that they would, in fact, have these safety nets there for them, and those have to be there. So we've got to begin looking at reforms that can happen now so that those people aren't threatened. But for people, I'll be 50 this year. And, I think people in my generation think, we don't even know if we can count on those systems. We shouldn't be in a position where, for example, we are looking to expand Medicaid. I don't believe in Medicaid expansion in the state. I think that these systems have for too long, in too many ways, that they're based on concepts and ideas and numbers in terms of how many years people are going to work that have just become fundamentally outmoded. So we want to be a society where we can give people the kinds of resources that have been promised to them. And that means that those systems are going to have to be fundamentally restructured, for people that are, I'd say, my age and below.
Well, how do you do that considering the debt that's going to be left behind?
Yeah. No, I think the issue of our federal debt and the explosion of the federal debt under this president has been huge. And unfortunately, what we've seen is, targeting things like our military and taking money away from the military in order to massively expand his programs. And, money being taken, for example, out of Medicare, which is a system that people have relied upon in order to expand Medicaid, in order to fund Obamacare. And so I think the first thing you've got to do is repeal Obamacare. And then you've got to make it much easier for people to plan on their own. You've got to be able to encourage people to have health savings accounts, encourage folks to begin making the kind of plans now and the kinds of investments now that will help them in the future, rather than try to create a system where the federal government is so all powerful that, it's sort of taking care of everyone from cradle to grave. The Soviets tried that. It didn't work.
Well, that gets back again to the debt, which if we don't handle that crushing problem. So once again, with the culture of Washington, D.C., how do you start scaling back the debt?
Well, I think that's where, again, you have to be willing to explain sort of what are fundamental conservative beliefs. And one of the most important is that the private sector is the engine of growth in our economy. And we've got to have economic growth in order to be able to begin to deal with the debt. And that means we've got to reduce taxes. We've got to reduce the cost of regulation on people. We have to have regulatory reform so that businesses aren't facing a situation where, they're essentially unable to operate because of the next unintended and arbitrary regulation coming down the pike. So at the core of everything has got to be the private sector. And today, that's part of the reason, going back to the energy industry, we have in this country and in this state the potential to have, an energy renaissance, with the technology we've got, with the resources we've got, with the people we've got. We really have the ability to be energy independent, and that very much can lead to an economic renaissance. And so it goes back to getting the government out of the way so that our businesses, our industries are able to operate the way they're supposed to, so that our farmers and ranchers are able to grow food and operate, on their own private land in a way that is fundamentally, American.
So you're talking about growing your way out of the debt.
Well, that's part of it.
Part of it.
Significantly have to reduce spending as well.
Right.
I mean, I think you've got to be in a position where the economy is growing. You got to look at how do you begin to grow the economy. You have to reduce people's taxes. And you got to cut government spending. The federal government is way too big, and wasteful, and we've got to be in a position where we're willing to make cuts.
Okay, so then including cuts, subsidies then, like to ethanol, to wind power.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that today, if we're in a situation which the president has described as let's try every possible source, it makes absolutely no sense given the ability we have to be energy independent with fossil fuels, that the government is subsidizing any other forms of energy. I'm not against them, but I think we have to be realistic, and people ought to have to compete. And we shouldn't have a government that is got its foot on the neck of our fossil fuel industry while it's paying taxpayer dollars to alternative.
Okay, so let's switch gears and go all the way south of the border now. So do we put a fence up? What do you do with border security? And I'm not just talking about an influx of, there's been a lot of refugees from South America, but also just in general, the terrorism that can leak across our border
Right.
at any given time. What do we do about the border?
Well, absolutely, we have to secure the border, and that will require, to some extent, improving and building more fence. It will require more border control agents. It will require more technology and surveillance so that we really can control the border. It will require the federal government taking responsibility, which right now they're not doing. And in fact, the president is not only looking the other way, but issuing executive orders that are making it much easier for people to come here illegally and refusing to send them back. Anybody who's in our prisons today who has committed a crime as an illegal immigrant needs to be immediately deported. We have to be able to know who's in our country. And as you point out, it's a national security issue for us. And we have to be able to differentiate between people who are breaking the law and who are coming here illegally. I don't believe that we should have a path to citizenship at all for people who've come illegally. But then we also have to look at how do we fix the legal immigration system, because we are a country of immigrants, and we should be in a situation where we have a system in place where people who are following the rules and who want to come here and contribute to our society and not take jobs away from American citizens are able to do that. And right now, both of those systems are fundamentally broken. The system to prevent illegal immigration and the system that allows people to come here legally. And we have to end the practice of sanctuary cities. I mean, that's,
Right. Well, how does the federal government end the practice of sanctuary cities if you have a state or a city that's not willing to play along?
Well, if the federal government, through its, ICE agents, were willing to actually enforce the law, and if the federal government, through the Justice Department, made clear that these laws had to be enforced, if somebody is stopped and they're an illegal immigrant, then, they get deported. Right now, the message has very clearly been sent: don't ask the question and look the other way. And that's not, that is just a recipe for us, frankly, not just to have an increase in illegal immigration, but as you pointed out, it's a national security threat. And I would just add to this that we need to stop the influx of refugees from Syria. And, we are a caring and compassionate nation, and we should be providing support for those refugees who've been displaced by ISIS and by the wars that are underway, but it should be in the Middle East. And when the president stands up and says that we have the ability to vet Syrian refugees, it's just fundamentally untrue.
Okay. Well, now that we're in the Middle East, let's just keep going. You and your father wrote a book. I read it. Very good book.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
So what do we do about Iran? And I'll tell you something I've been wanting. Last time I saw you and your father, I didn't get a chance to say this because there were so many people there. You draw a crowd, you know that.
Yeah.
And why make a deal with Iran? Because whether the deal is a good deal or a bad deal, they're lying.
Right.
So there's no point to making the deal with Iran. So how do we handle Iran?
Well, the problem in particular with this deal is that it gave Iran cover of legitimacy. So you've now got the Iranian president traveling to European capitals to get more investment into Iran. And at the same time, it gave him a path to a nuclear weapon. When we were working on that book, we were in the process of writing it when the deal was being negotiated. And so we had to sort of guess and based on rumors and reports in the news, exactly what the deal would contain. And then when the deal was revealed, it turned out to be much worse than even our worst guesses and our worst, estimates, because not only are we giving them a pathway to get a nuclear weapon, we're sending taxpayer dollars to the world's worst state sponsor of terror. We're releasing funds that have been frozen that, even John Kerry a couple of weeks ago said, well, some of that money probably is going to end up with some terrorist groups. I mean, so it's, you know, you never, that I can recall, seen a situation where you've had the United States providing the kind of support and facilitation, sadly, for the world's worst state sponsor of terror that this deal does.
So what do we do in lieu of the deal? Does the next president tear it up?
Yes, no. You've got to repeal the deal. You've got to make sure that the sanctions stay in place. We should not be lifting the sanctions on their ballistic missile program. We shouldn't be lifting the sanctions on their conventional weapons programs. Those have all got to stay in place. And the Iranians have to recognize that, you know, an Iranian nuclear weapon is a threat, not just to us, but to our allies in the region, to the Israelis. And one of the things that people sometimes don't think about is that as soon as the Iranians are going down this path, the Sunni Arab nations will also try to get nuclear weapons. And in the Middle East, those capitals are so close to each other that you very quickly find yourself in a position where any dispute, particularly of the kind that we're seeing there today, could very quickly become nuclear. And that's just not a stable world. It's obviously not a world in which we can live. We've got to prevent that from happening.
In a part of the world that is that unstable, and from time to time, some of that leaks over here into the United States, what do we do about ISIS? What do we do about Syria?
Yeah, well, ISIS, we have to be willing to take away the caliphate. We've got to do what's necessary to prevent them from becoming a further threat to us. You know, they've said that their target is the United States and that they're willing to attack us. And they use the fact that they actually have territory that they call a caliphate to attract recruits. And we can't be in a situation every day that exists, and every day that ISIS is able to say, we're standing up to America, they become stronger and stronger. And the president, when we look at the damage of this president's legacy, and we've talked about what the damage is going to be to us here at home, it will also be that he just completely looked the other way while this grave threat grew, and in fact lied about it. You know, when you talk about what happened after Benghazi, he lied to the American people consistently about the threat we face.
Right. Well, okay. So that brings us back to some local issues then, because the last time you ran, there was the carpetbagger, a lot of people threw that at you. And I thought you had a good answer for that. But where have you been since you last ran? Have you been in Wyoming? Have you been in D.C.? And what do you answer those people who say, well, you dropped out last time, you left us?
Right. Well, I got out of the race last time. We had a tragedy in our family. Mm-hmm. And my responsibilities as a mom were absolutely number one. And we have 5 kids. Our oldest daughter's in college, but our younger 4 are in Wilson and go to school in Wilson, Wyoming. And so in addition to working on the book that you mentioned, I spend a lot of my time, taking kids to baseball practice and hockey practice and the high school rodeo team. My 15-year-old's on the high school rodeo team. But no, we live in Wyoming, have been living here. It's been home to my family for 4 generations. And, when people say, launch the carpetbagger attack, I think to myself, well, probably when my great-grandfather settled in Fremont County in 1907, people probably said the same thing about him. And, I'm sure it's a charge that'll come, but, the values of the people who came to this state first, including my ancestors and many other people's, are very much at risk today. And that's why I'm in this race. That's why I decided I couldn't sit by the sidelines, and decided that I would get in and feel very strongly we have to stand up and fight for our freedoms and for our constitutional rights, that they're very much under threat today.
Okay, so last time you ran for Senate, this time it's House of Representatives. Is House of Representatives a stepping stone toward the Senate?
Listen, I think that Wyoming has been really blessed for many years to have very strong people in all 3 of those seats. We obviously have a history of strong members of Congress, members of the House of Representatives. And I think that there's something that is really special and unique about the House of Representatives. I think it's a place where, it's not as sort of staid as the Senate is. The issue of seniority isn't as big an issue. I think that, I'm looking forward very much, if I'm honored by the votes of the people of Wyoming, to representing the state for a long time in the House of Representatives. I certainly don't look at it as a stepping stone. I look at it as an opportunity to do something that is fundamentally important and crucial for us to begin to revive our economy and defend our freedoms.
Okay, you're a type A plus personality. So you started with a news record, you went to here. Now where to? Because you know how this works now. You're going to be all over the state. So where are you going from here?
Well, tomorrow we'll be over in Sheridan, and then from there I'll head down to Casper and then to Cheyenne, and we'll be on the road. And the thing about Wyoming is the importance of personal campaigning, and I am very dedicated to earning every vote in this race, to having the chance to talk to people all across the state, to answer their questions, to talk about what I feel is important and hear their concerns. And so I'm excited about getting to spend the next 6 months or so out on the road until the primary, and then obviously beyond that to the general.
All right, Liz, thanks for coming in and starting it here.
Great to be here. Thank you.